Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining again. I think this is week 5. This week we're going to do a bunch of random stuff. We're going to do tips and tricks for your systems, talk about things like algae, light cycles, how to clean out your system, common tools that you'll need in hydroponics, a bunch of random stuff. So I'm going to give it just a few moments. Hopefully some people will join us or more people will join us. And in that time, I'm going to go ahead and pull up this video on my computer so I can see any comments or anything like that along the way. All right. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and get started. This will be recorded. It'll be on our page. Hopefully everybody will get a chance to come back and check it out later. So, first thing, a lot of people will always ask, and this is a great question, how often should you clean out your system? So you're dealing with water. And as we all know, water that sits becomes stagnant. It's going to start smelling, stinking. Stuff's going to grow in it that you don't want in your plants. Algae will develop, things like that. So first and foremost, you should do an entire deep clean of your system at least once a month. In between that time, you'll want to make sure that you're filling up the water, it doesn't run out of water, testing your pH, things like that. If it becomes gritty, nasty, salty inside of your reservoir, your tubes, you start noticing some funk or it smells funny before that month is up, definitely go ahead and clean it. Better to get it taken care of ahead of time before it starts affecting your plants. So plants obviously will take the roots in the bucket. They'll take up everything that's in the bucket. And if that's bad water and nasty water, that's what'll happen. So I think I'm kind of going in and out just a little bit on the live video, but I'll kind of try and watch that, and hopefully if it pauses I'll notice, and I'll stop for you guys. So first question was, how often should you clean your system? So we're going to say about once a month. You could do more or less depending on the type of nutrients that you're running, if your water smells, things like that. What's the best way to drain your water? So in our systems, we actually put in this little plug stop. And I've just got an example here to show you how it works. So it's a little rubber grommet that you put inside of your bin, whether that be your aeroponics tub, crakey tub, deep water culture, whatever the case may be. You can put your little rubber grommet in there, and then you take this plug and you plug it up. And when you're ready, you just pull that plug out. Water will come right out, it'll drain. I always recommend in hydroponics that you have a 5-gallon bucket. It will do you so much good. Not only for mixing your solutions, but in a case like this, you can drain it easily, carry your water back and forth. Sometimes you've got it, some of our bins are 27 gallons of water. You can't really carry that. You want to make sure you break it down. Don't hurt yourself. So draining, 5-gallon bucket's always good. Any kind of like handheld cup, make sure you put a drain in it. Make it easy on yourself. Think about that stuff ahead of time before you put a bunch of water in your reservoir. Do you have, a drain nearby? Can you just open it up and let the floodgates out? Do you have a French drain? Is it outside? Stuff like that. Next on the list, let's talk about pumps. So there's a few different kinds of pumps. There are air stone pumps, or air pumps as they're often referred to. They will look like this. This one is a single outlet. So right here, this will plug into the wall. You don't submerge this. It sits right outside of your reservoir, whatever that may be. It will pump air through a little tiny tube like this. And this one has a clear tube. That's important. We're going to come back and talk about tube colors soon. And at the end of that tube in this pump, you're going to have an air stone. So this air stone, I think we talked about this a little bit before, but for those of you that don't know, it's similar to what you would find in a fish tank. So fish need oxygen, plants need oxygen. That's how they live. That's how they breathe. So a pump, an air stone, it'll go a long way. It'll add extra life to your plants that you didn't see before. And it's only, maybe $20 for an air stone and a pump and the tube and everything like that. So relatively cheap compared to the output that you're going to get from it. So highly recommend that. Next on the list, when to transplant your plants. So definitely get your seeds started. Let them get nice and strong. About 2 to 3 weeks, depending on what you're growing. But the important part to think about is you want to have some roots on it. Maybe about yay long, about 2 inches. What that's going to do is it's going to allow you to take your plant, your little plant pod, put it into the net cup, and you're going to be able to have your roots already dangling down and into the water, whatever water you choose, whether that be deep water culture, nutrient film technique, whatever the case may be. You want to make sure you have some roots exposed. That way they're not just clinging to the pod. If you transplant your plants too early, you'll have to baby them for a while. You'll have to hand water them, and that's actually, that's inconvenient. That's not the point of this. So set yourself up for success. Wait until your roots are about 2 inches long. Make sure you put those roots through the net cup and have them dangling down away from the plant, and that's what you're going to dip into the water. Now, talking about roots and talking about, air. So plants actually have air roots, and something that you can do is you can drown a plant. So when you're dealing with hydroponics, there's a fine line between giving water and nutrients to the roots and covering up those air roots, which is how the plant breathes. The air roots are usually at the base of the plant, so normally what you would see right under the dirt, which we don't deal with dirt, so right under your cocoa, right under your clay pebbles, there will be some nice, fuzzy, short, fat roots. Those are your air roots. Make sure you don't cover those up. If you cover them up, your plant might try and fight it off. For instance, we had a habanero plant that was nice and big and flourishing, and the air roots were covered on the last nutrient change, and all of his leaves are gone. So he's resilient, he's coming back, he's trying, but point of the matter is, we set ourselves back maybe a month just by covering those air roots one time. So simple mistake, anyone can do it, but it's really important to try your best not to cover those air roots. Another thing to think about is in your system, whatever system that you use, if it is a nutrient film technique, remember that's the one that has the reservoir at the bottom. You're pumping the water up, you're running it through tubes of some sort, and it's dropping back down. So nutrient film technique just means that there's basically always a film or a small layer of nutrients or water running across your roots at all time. So something that we came into, with the nutrient film technique that could have been really bad, but we were able to catch it, was that your drainage tube can get clogged with the roots. So roots are long and skinny, and they don't develop all at once. Your plants are constantly growing, and if they grow into your drainage tube, what will happen, just like think about hair in your bathtub or your drain, it'll clog it up. So it won't be able to drain, and at that point your water will continue pumping through the system, but it will never drain back into your reservoir. That is a big disaster, just waiting to happen. Few things. It means that your water is probably going to end up on the floor soon. It's going to overflow. It means that your pump is going to run dry. So normally a submersible pump, which we're going to talk about next, it needs to have water over it in order for it to run properly or function properly. So you're going to make sure to, unclog your line whenever you can. Watch it, put a screen over it, something like that. Just make sure that your roots aren't, going to make everything go bad. So before we move on, I did want to talk about the submersible pump. So similar to an air pump, a submersible pump is a pump that you put underwater in your reservoir, and it will take the water, run it through the pump, and it'll pump it up to the top. So we use submersible pumps in almost everything that we deal with here except for deep water culture and crayky. So our drip tower uses it, nutrient film technique, ebb and flow, all of those bigger systems and the systems that you would normally see on a larger commercial scale, they have submergible pumps. There are different kinds of pumps. Something to think about when you're building a system or you're buying a pump is how high do you need your water to go? Do you need it to pump 5 feet? Do you have a tower that's 6 feet tall? Do you have a 3 foot tall tower? Do you have an ebb and flow that's 4 foot off the ground? Almost all of your pumps on the back of them, they will have your gallons per hour and how tall, what's the max reach that it can have. And something important to know about your submergible pumps is the max height might be 5 feet, but at that point you're not getting much output. Couple gallons an hour, and as the height lowers down, let's say a max height of 5 feet on a pump, let's say you drop it down to 3 feet, well, all of a sudden you're getting twice as much water. So the lower that your pump has to go, the more water you're going to get out of it, versus the higher the pump has to go, the higher up that it has to go, that pressure has to get all the way up there. It's going to be more of like a trickle. So it's important to make sure that you're getting the right size pump. You don't want to have it too powerful. In that case, it will overflow your system. If it's not powerful enough, it will just never make it to where you need it to go. Basically, the water will just kind of sit and never pump to the top where, the water should be pumped out. So that's important. That's the second kind of pump. Another thing to note about the nutrient film technique specifically in that submergible pump is if your power goes out and you have no way to run your pump, well, then your roots aren't sitting in any water. And if that happens for a long period of time, that can actually be really bad, because your plants, unless you hand water them, they'll die. So we think it's important that if you're going to grow, plants at your house using the nutrient film technique or one of these others that doesn't necessarily always have water on the roots, get a battery backup. They're pretty cheap. And you could use it for other things at your house too. So if your power goes out, it will automatically kick on and keep things, kicking and running as they should. For instance, I have one for my computer and the internet. So in the hopes that, the power goes out and the internet's still on, I can still power it. And then a few other things to think about are your timers. So timers are great for two things. They're great for your lights, and they are also great for your pumps. So some things like the towers and the ebb and flow, you're not constantly pumping. You don't want to, waterlog the plants. So for instance, the tower, it only, I want to say, cycles through about 5 times a day. It'll rain on it for about 30 minutes, 5 times a day. And that's possible through a timer. So I don't have to come in here and do it. My day off is my day off. I get to just let it run, which is pretty neat. So timer is highly recommendable. There's, different kinds. This one's just a single timer, pretty, small, cheap. It goes 30 minutes at a time. There's also bigger timers. So this one has 2 outlets. This is great if you're running like 2 different lights and you want to have them click on and off at the same time, or if you have multiple systems and multiple pumps. And another thing to look at is, how long is each one of the timers going to keep you on? Is it 15 minutes? Is it 30 minutes? So if you're doing something like an ebb and flow, and you might only need 15 minutes on, or else it might overflow. So think about that when you're buying a timer. And we do have a question from Lisa: how expensive are the battery backups? I think we got ours for like $40. And it had, I want to say 5 or 6 different outlets and a few different USB outlets. So here at the shop, we run a battery backup for our point of sale system, our internet, the pump like I mentioned, our phone lines, things like that. So a couple weeks ago, our power went out for about 30 minutes, but we still had people coming in and they still want to, look around and browse and buy things. So, and most people, they pay with credit cards or some form of digital payment now. So it was nice that I was able to not only help them and ring them up, but process their credit card when the power was out. And the same, logic can be applied to your pump. So when the power is out, you want to keep them going. And we talked about timers for your lights. So there's a few different lights cycles to note. And we talked about this in our light video, but I just want to touch on it again. When you're doing vegetative growth, green growth, things that require, leaves to get big and healthy, you're going to want to put that on an 18 on, 6 off. So 18 hours on, 6 hours off. I recommend you put those 6 hours off in the middle of the night, somewhere from like 12 to 6 or something like that, 11 to 5. But when you start switching to flowering and you want flowers and eventually fruit, flowers is what gives you fruit, you'll want to switch to a 12 on, 12 off. And again, just change your timer. It'll automatically do that. And what it'll do is it'll push the flowers. It'll push a lot of flowers to your plants, which is great. It's the reason why I really like hydroponics, because you can kind of push everything to the max. We talked about air roots, air stones. Let's talk about tubing. I did say that we would come back to that. So it's really important in hydroponics for the most part if you're running, if you're dealing with water. So like this tube is pretty common for most of the pumps and systems that we deal with. You want to use it black. If you use something clear, what's going to happen is the light's going to get into it. Algae is going to start forming, and it will get into your plants. And algae won't necessarily kill your plants, but what it'll do is it'll take all the nutrients away from your plants, and they'll grow, really slow, if at all. So black tubing is always great. The reason that we can get away with the clear tubing on the air stone and the air pump is because it's not pushing water. So this has nothing to do with the water. It's only pushing air to the air stone. So other than that, black tubing, don't get the clear, don't get the white. That could be bad. Which is, another example of your system. So you'll see that a lot of times we have black tubs in here. Our ebb and flow, table is black. Everything that we deal with is either dark and black to keep the light out or really thick. So for instance, this is a tower that I'm working on. So it's a normal PVC tower, but you can see like how thick it is. So the light's not going to penetrate through that. So that would also work. Something to kind of look out for is you'll see like the inner caps that can go on these that are real thin and kind of clear, that will let light through. So in that case, you don't want to use that on your PVC. You'll want to use like a really thick cap, just like this material would be. So that prevents your light from coming through and ultimately your algae. So algae is, it's something that we have to deal with. And it's not to say that if you get algae that you're a bad grower. It happens. But let's talk about ways to deal with the algae. So first is to just prevent it. So a good way to prevent it, and something that I really love, is called HydroGuard. So we put this in every single nutrient mixture that we deal with, and we'll talk about nutrients are next week. So we'll talk about mixing nutrients, testing your pH, things like that. But HydroGuard just creates a healthy environment, a bacterial root inoculant. So it should help create that good bacteria, so that way the algae does have a hard time forming. Another thing that you can do is you can use a cleaning, so either like Clearex or FluoroClean, and you can use this in your system in between system cleans. When you do a deep clean and you completely take everything out and start over from scratch, this is great as well, but you can also do it in between. It won't hurt your plants. I also believe that this can be, it's used for salt buildup, but it doesn't necessarily have to be used for hydroponics. So you can use it for potting soil and other soilless mixes that aren't necessarily true circulating hydroponics. So FluoroClean and Clearex, that'll get all that nasty stuff out of your system if it does in fact get in there. And you know what? I want to talk a little bit about peroxide. So let's say you've got your starter plants going, or your plants are already growing and you start seeing algae on them and you want to get rid of it. I would recommend peroxide, but not the peroxide in the brown bottle you find at the drugstore. That's actually really bad. And the reason is that peroxide in and of itself is very corrosive. So in order to make it shelf stable, so in order for you to get it at the grocery store or the drugstore, they put a lot of additives in it, and those additives and those stabilizers are not good for your plants. So while it won't kill them, it's just not recommended. In that case, we recommend food grade hydrogen peroxide. So that's going to be 35% versus like something like a 3%, which is the brown bottle you'll find at the drugstore. So 35% food grade hydrogen peroxide, and from there you dilute it. So basically 1 part peroxide to 12 parts water, and that will give you a nice clean peroxide solution that you can water your plants with, flush your system with. You can spray the roots, you can spray the base, and it won't hurt it. It's only going to help your plants at that point. So that's another way to control algae. And then today I also wanted to talk about just some random things you would need dealing with hydroponics or building your own system. Eventually we'd like to do some classes and show you guys how we do this, but in the meantime, a few things that you might want to have on hand, dealing with hydroponics and building your own systems are hole saws. So they look like this, and the hole saws, they essentially just make the little hole in the top of the lid, which is where your net cup drops in. In your net cup goes your plant, your roots dangle through to the water, so it just gives you a nice, neat cut that's the size of your pot. So you need a 3-inch, you need a 2-inch, and then it's important to note that when you use a 3-inch and a 2-inch net pot, that it has a lip on it. So it's not exactly 3 inches, it's a little bit wider, so it sits down in there and it doesn't fall through. That's also pretty bad. I recommend just some different drill bits and things like that. That's how we make, you know, like the holes for, you know, the plug that I talked about earlier, the rubber grommets and things like that. You'll obviously need a screwdriver. You'll want to make sure to measure twice and cut once. So I recommend some sort of ruler or tape measure or something like that. Be cognizant of where you're drilling holes, where you're cutting things. The materials that we're using can get expensive, so make sure, you know, you measure twice, cut once. That's the general consensus. A nice box cutter goes a long way, so we use this when we're, you know, making our towers. It cuts through heated PVC really nice. And then also a heat gun. So the heat gun that I would actually recommend is 1200 watts. So it's actually not very big. You can get much bigger heat guns. What's going to happen though is it could get too hot and it can melt the plastic that you're dealing with, or the PVC. And at that point it's going to burn. It might tear, it might rip. And then when it forms back together, you might not even have a PVC that's usable. It might not be, you know, thick enough. The light might be coming through, things like that. So definitely make sure you don't heat it up too much. You don't want to burn the plastic. And you know, one more thing that I had on my list to talk about today is, you know, when you get flowering plants like peppers, for instance, tomatoes, you'll need to pollinate them yourself. If you got them indoors and you don't have bugs, bees, things like that that are going to pollinate for you, you have to do that. And a few different ways that you can do that. You can literally just walk up to your plant. We recommend you do it in the morning once you start seeing the flowers. And a couple times a day, just shake your plant, like real aggressively. You want to shake it, get the pollen going. Basically, you want everything that's in those flowers to start flying around and catching on the other ones. Another way that you could do it is take a Q-tip just into the inside of the flower. I've seen people use toothbrushes, electric toothbrushes, things like that. Anything that you can do to stimulate the flower to mimic the flower being outside and being pollinated by plants and bugs. Because if you do not pollinate, you're likely not to get fruit. That's not to say that you won't. Maybe if you have a fan on it or something like that, it might still work without you intervening. But if you're dealing with a plant that flowers and fruits indoors, pollinate it yourself. You won't have any regrets. At least that way you know that it will give you fruit later on. So I don't think we have any questions, but I do see people joining, so I'm going to wait a second, see if anyone has any questions. And in the meantime, let's see if I can take you guys outside and show you the habanero plant that I covered the air roots on. I can't believe I did that. And you know what? When I was doing it, I was like, no, that's not the air roots. It'll be fine. It wasn't fine. I got a little mic this time. Hopefully you guys can hear me better. Alright. Here's my wimpy little plant. I still got my habaneros on there. They didn't fall off, but as you can see, most of the leaves fell off. He looks like a Charlie Brown pepper plant. So hopefully it'll all come back. I'm hopeful, because the peppers didn't fall off. I won't have any new peppers. The flowers fell off. But luckily, I have some other pepper plants not germinated, started over here. They're mature. They're already starting to produce some fruit. So we have 8 in there, and then a couple in the tent up front. And all of these we pollinate, like I was just talking about, shaking them. You'll see me regularly walk around the store just shaking the plants. I'm not abusing them. All right, let's take a look at those. So we got tons of peppers back there in the back. I don't know if you guys can see them. And 2 of those plants went through shock themselves, and they're back pumping, giving us tons of fruit, tons. I mean, the one cayenne in the back is probably got 20 of them on there, so that's pretty cool. All right, guys, I don't see any other questions. Next week is mixing nutrients. So this will actually be, you know, this is one of the more difficult ones in my opinion, just because it can be intimidating. There's so many different solutions and nutrients. You don't know which, you know, what's the correct mixture, what order to put them in, things like that. So we'll talk about all of that next week. I will actually mix up some nutrients for you. We'll talk about some of the more popular ones, some of the different additives and things like that. So that is next Tuesday. Be there or be square, you know, and even if you're not there, maybe you'll watch the video later. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining. Hope you all have a good night.